Remember that TV show, Kids Say the Darndest Things? I want to actually do a flip that a little bit, flip it on its head, and I want to talk about how our minds can do some of the darndest things. And it can take us places sometimes that we're not really aware of. And some of those places can be a bit surprising. And so, this is something that I know that when you're in the midst of a transition, a life transition in particular, and that is where you're not quite where you want to be, but you're in that in between space. Our minds can take us to some very interesting places. It can be surprising, it can be upsetting, it can be disturbing, even, but our minds will actually do some things that we don't quite expect. And I want to talk about one of the most powerful and least discussed experiences that shows up in the midst of change, and that is grief. Now, last week I gave a talk about grief, and I shared that sometimes before we can really step into our next chapter, we have to grieve. We have to release whatever was before us so that we can move to the next step. And we're grieving not just for what we lost, but for who we've been and what that means to us. Now, today I want to go a little bit deeper than I did in that talk, because I want you to understand that there are several layers when it comes to grief. And I think that once you understand what those layers are, you'll be able to move through your own transition. And we're all in transition at some point with a little more grace and a lot more compassion for yourself. I want to start off by talking about the three layers of grief when you're going through a life transition. And so when we're moving through or from one chapter of our lives to the next, whether it's a career shift, a relationship change, a new role, or you're simply realizing that you have and you are becoming someone different, there's almost always a season of grief. And it's not just one kind. There are three things that we want to go through. The first level of grief is for who you were. And what that means is that as you move to your next level, it means that you just cannot carry everything that you had before with you. You can't. And God knows that we've been holding on to some things. We've been dragging it, holding it, carrying it for God knows when or how long. But some of those things, these things being your habits, your mindsets, your fears, your beliefs, sometimes it's people, and it's truly the old version of yourself cannot go where you're going. It has to stay behind. And that's not always easy, because we are connected to that person or that version of ourselves. And that person, that version of you really was real. She mattered. He got you through some things that you wouldn't have gotten through otherwise. And letting go of that version of yourself, even when it's time, you know you need to, you know it's beneficial for where you're going next, it can feel like a loss. And you want to give yourself the permission to acknowledge that. The second layer of grief is for who you could have been. Now, this one's a little bit different because sometimes in the middle of your transition, you get a clear-eyed view of your own potential. And you say to yourself, if you had been a little more focused, if you had made some different decisions, if you had invested differently, if you had gone left when you went right, things would have turned out differently. And where you're trying to go now, or what you're trying to accomplish in your life, you might already be there. And that recognition that woulda, coulda, I could have done this might have happened a long time ago, it can be devastating. And the grief of that is very real. And that's something that you have to acknowledge as well. The third layer of grief is for releasing a vision that you once held for yourself. Now, think about when you were a kid and someone asked you what you wanted to be when you grew up. You may have come up with a lot of things. I want to be a doctor, a teacher, a lawyer. I want to be an artist. I want to be a singer. I want to be whatever. And you might have had several variations of it. I know I did in my life. But my biggest one was an artist. I knew I was going to be an artist. But you might have had some variations of what that was going to be. And at some point, you realize that as you're looking at that, the vision shifted. Things changed. And the dream that you held on to, and you realize that it just doesn't do it for you anymore. And there's no anger in it, there's no bitterness, there's no regret in some cases, but you have to look at it honestly so that you can make a decision. Is this still where you want to be? Or do you want to switch and do something else? And guess what? You can, but you have to be clear about what it is and make some decisions. And so when you're looking at a dream and you're realizing it's not going the way that you thought it would, it might be time to let it go. And in the letting go of a vision that you've had for years, perhaps, there can be some grief and loss around that. Now, even though I'm talking about these layers of grief, there's something that happens beneath it, beneath the story, and we want to talk about what that is. And it really is about identity. And we grieve. The grief is not just for the experiences, but who we are or who we were within those experiences. And so I want you to think about a few things. Think about the relationships that you have. When you step into a new version of yourself, some of the people around you will definitely feel the shift, because some of them were connected to you not for who you are, like underneath the whole picture, but for the role or the persona you wore and their connection to that persona. So the role that you played meant something to them, and they were connected to you because of it. And when that role changes, those connections change too. It's not always a bad thing that the connections change, but it can feel like a loss. And so for some of us, it's like I'm losing the people that I've known forever. I'm losing my connections to people because I'm making this shift into another phase of my life. You also want to think about, this is number 2, the life dreams that you once held. Now, maybe you had some things in mind that you knew you were going to do. Maybe you wanted to be married. And somewhere along the line, you're realizing, well, it hasn't happened yet. I'm not so sure this is really it. And there could be a number of reasons why. Maybe that person that you thought was the one, you realize up close and personal, maybe you guys are not vibing at the same level, or maybe you don't hold the same values, or maybe there's something that has happened that has just changed the dynamics of the relationship, so much so that you're just feeling like, maybe not. Perhaps you wanted to have children. And if you're a woman in your 40s, late 40s, and beyond, you know that you can no longer do that biologically. You might have to consider what other options are there if you decide you still want to have children. Maybe, there was a path that you had mapped out, and somewhere along the way, the path changed. You made some decisions about a particular career, which meant it didn't close off the door for everything else, but it changed so much so that it would make it very complicated to go back in that direction. Now, for some people, arriving at that point in life where you realize that a certain dream is not going to happen, or it's not going to unfold the way that you expected, there's a lot of grief around that. And it deserves to be honored. It doesn't deserve, you don't have to dramatize it. You don't have to make it a woe is me. You don't have to make it victimization. And you don't have to avoid it, but you do have to be real about the fact that this is something that once meant a lot to you. And now you're realizing you have to make some other changes. Because what happens is you don't just release the dream. You may not release the dream entirely. Sometimes you release a version of what that was or what it is. You release the idea that it has to look a certain way, happen at a certain time, or even involve specific people. And in releasing that, you make room, you make space for something new to take place. Number 3, you want to think about even your professional identity. Now, some of us have built so much of our sense of selves around who we are, what we do, the title that we hold, the role that we play at work. And when that role changes for any reason, you're no longer the boss. You're no longer the director. You're no longer the vice president. You're no longer the president. You're no longer the business owner or even the go-to person. There can be a real sense of loss because you don't know how to acclimate yourself to this new space that you're in. Because the role, when it's gone, a big part of how you understand yourself has changed. And that makes a big difference for many of us. And then, fourthly, you want to think about what happens when responsibility changes your world. Now, what I mean about that is for some of us, there comes a time when we take on, or we will take on, or when you may take on a caregiving role for a child. Maybe you are a grandparent who is parenting grandchildren. Maybe it's your child who has a health condition or health issue and you have to take care of them. It might be a spouse who is incapacitated, disabled, or something, and you really have to take care of them. It could be a parent who's having a health challenge, or they're aging and they just cannot take care of themselves the way that they used to, and they need you. They need someone to actually step in and help them, and you might be tasked to do it for a number of reasons. You might be an only child, or you might be the person who knows that you want to do this for your parent or your spouse or your loved one or your sibling or whoever it is. So it's a caregiving role that changes what happens in your life. And with that responsibility, it permanently changes the way that you make decisions. Now, I took on the responsibility of becoming a guardian for children. Today they're 10. Right now they're 10 years old. And so with it came the change in how I make decisions about everything in my life. And it's a big shift, and it's something that I think about it often. I think, oh my goodness, I can't do what I used to do anymore. But the freedom to come and go as you please, for me even to come and go as I please, gone. I can't do that anymore. The ability to make decisions just for myself. And if you're a caregiver, the ability to make decisions just for yourself, you can't do that. And there's grief when you recognize that the person who could do all of those things freely whenever they got ready is no longer who you are today. You can't, it's just not possible. You cannot do it. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. It just means that life has asked something different of you, and you have said yes to that. But still, there's a sense of grief about what has happened and what it feels like you lost because you're now in this new position. Now, here's where I want to offer you a different perspective. This is just a different way of looking at what's going on, because this is what's true about this. None of it means that your best days are behind you. It doesn't mean that, your glory days are behind. Woe is me. I don't have anything to look forward to. On the contrary, it means that it's a transition. And if you're willing to sit with it, sit with the grief and move through it, it's an invitation for you to choose. You get to decide exactly what you want. It's like having a blank canvas, and you get to decide what you want your life to look like in this particular space that you're in. Not just in where you are right now, but beyond. What happens beyond that? And you get to shape this. You get to form the idea in your mind of what it can be. And you get to decide what kind of values you want to apply to this space that you're in. You get to decide what kind of energy you want to bring to this. And you want to actually think about what matters to you right now. Not what mattered to you 10 years ago. Not what mattered to you 5 years ago. And for some people, not even what mattered to you 1 year ago, because things shift and they change. And so you have to recognize that. And as things are changing, there are losses that are taking place. People are going. People are no longer there. Your role is now changing. And you have to consider what matters most to me right now. And then you also have to make sure that you're not looking at what someone else's version of your life could or should be, but you have to think about what's important to you right now. And the beautiful thing is, if you can hold on to that vision of what your life could possibly be, if you can hold it long enough and you can truly embrace what you want the next chapter of your life to feel like, you will begin to experience it. If you can actually get yourself out of the sense of loss or anger or frustration or disappointment that now you're in this phase and oh my goodness, now I've got to deal with this all the time, then you can actually shape a different version of your life. You can make it look the way that you want it to look. And the truth is, this is not wishful thinking. It's how transformation works. And it does require, though, that you let go of the person that you were before, because you're transitioning into a new person. So all of the person that you were before, you let it go. You let it go with gratitude. You let it go with respect, with honor, and with intention. That this next stage of your life, this next season, is one where you become who you want to become, given the parameters of life that you're living at this moment. So today I want to leave you with a question. It's not a complicated question, it's a powerful question. As you are moving into your next phase, your next season, your next chapter, what does this all mean for you? Because at some point you're going to be able to look back and make a decision about, wow, at that point, this is what was happening. But the question is, what is the significance of this moment in your story? And you have to be true to yourself, because you don't want to carry what it means to anybody else. You really want to focus on what it means to you, not from what happens on the outside, but for you. If you take a moment and you sit down and you ask yourself every single day until you get a clear answer, God, what does this mean? What does this moment mean? Sit in silence long enough. Give yourself 10 to 15 minutes a day and see what kinds of things come up for you, because that's what is important at this moment. And you want to sit with it. You want to breathe into it, because the answer is waiting for you and you deserve it. You deserve to know what it means, and you deserve to be able to live in this next chapter, in this next season, fully alive, feeling like you are thriving in your life. And that's the most important thing that I want to share with you today. So I want to say thank you for listening. Until the next time, I want you to keep moving forward and continue to be courageously alive. Bye for now.